Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Hope you are doing awesome, guys. Hope you are doing well. Today we are going to discuss a topic which was mentioned before in one of the past videos we've had, but this is going to be specifically a way to talk about and to discuss a way to take dopamine and maximize it for your work and also lift, which in this case means gym performance, and for the work we specifically mean both your workplace or business, and then the second thing is also the education or studying aspect of your life. Now, I will mention that the dopamine is a very specific neurotransmitter, and what I will basically tell you and you need to know is that it basically wants to maintain a baseline level. What this means is that whenever you make it too high or too low, it will try to make an equilibrium of it, and it will try to return to the baseline levels. And the dopamine very specifically governs or makes you more likely to feel shit or to make you feel good. For example, if you eat a piece of chocolate, you feel fucking good about it. That's also the dopamine which was increased from that. And what you then usually you would expect or you would like to hear is that since you ate a piece of chocolate, then your dopamine is going to stay up and you will feel even better after you've eaten the chocolate, for example. But that isn't how it works and isn't the truth. But what is actually going to happen is that it will decrease after, and you will basically need to return to the baseline level of the dopamine you had before, which is why you will feel after eating a particular piece of chocolate, maybe several hours after. But not while you are eating, because while you're eating the dopamine is increased. So you just have to think of it as a seesaw effect, where if you increase your dopamine with a particular activity or habit, well then you will need to return to the baseline which you had previously. And how does that manifest is that you may lose motivation in the next few hours after, or you may not even want to do anything at all. Is you have to remember that the baseline is really for the dopamine the thing that it needs to be maintained, and the dopamine works in the seesaw effect of if it's too much decrease, it's going to come up, which while it's coming up to the baseline level, it will make you more motivated even for some completely random activities. Or if it's actually too high above the baseline level, which we'll talk about what this baseline for you will mean, well, what will happen is that once you are too much above that baseline, it has to drop back. And these are the states which we usually think about when we are unmotivated, where we can't seem to do shit, maybe during the weekends when people wake up or stay in the bed till 12 p.m. Well, those could be the times where you usually see that manifest, that let's say drop in the dopamine from when it was too high the previous day. Now, what needs to be also said is that there are basically two ways that it can be released. One is a tonic release, which is one which is more concerned about being released all the time in your brain. Dopamine doesn't just maintain itself at the baseline levels, and the baseline is also not zero. The dopamine is being consistently and constantly released in your brain throughout the day. That's how it works with many other neurotransmitters, which you have as well. But you just need to figure out that probably the baseline needs to be maintained by the brain, and the dopamine gets constantly released even when you sleep, except some particular phases of sleep. But it gets basically sprinkled throughout all the day. Then there are the second type, which is the phasic releases, and those are usually the instant releases, which is, again, we could go back towards the chocolate example, is that the dopamine can get sprinkled throughout your brain in a phasic release because of the chocolate you've just eaten or started to eat. So there are basically these two types, and they are very important because you need to figure out which activities usually are those ones which basically make you release dopamine to very high levels instantly, because those are the ones you need to be basically the most wary of. But this is also why I wanted to jump into additional topic, is that it's not just about whether it is released instantly or over time, which is this tonic versus phasic release, but there is also a phenomenon which you need to figure out, is that dopamine can act either as a sprinkler, which means it can either be sprinkled throughout your entire brain, or it can also act locally on that matter. Now, the way you can think about it is that dopamine can either act on the entire structure of your brain, so for pretty much everything you do, it can make you feel good about pretty much everything, or it can also act locally, which would mean that you would feel good about a particular activity or about a particular thing that happened or that is about to happen. So we also need to figure out there are different states of the dopamine which can either affect your entire brain, or, well, of course not the entirety of it, but a larger part of it, or it can be also just sprinkled in a very small part of the brain. So there are also these two things you need to figure out. Now, what I've also rewritten down for you is that there's one huge thing you need to, or let's say third thing you need to figure out, is that since we've talked about these baseline levels about 2 minutes ago, you also want to figure out and watch out for how much you increase your dopamine previously. The baseline level actually moves, yeah? So the baseline level of dopamine moves, and it can increase, which you would estimate that it's good, and it basically increases or decreases based on your previous history of how much elevated your dopamine has been. Now, I will tell you one thing, how to think about this, because I've explicitly told you that you might figure out that that the increase of baseline dopamine is good, that it will make you feel good all the time. But then what actually happens, this is especially in the case of when people play video games, for example, all the time. For example, let's consider Twitch streamers or someone similar. Since they increase their dopamine all the time, the baseline follows as well. Whenever you increase your dopamine, it has to come back to the baseline after, but the baseline goes higher when the dopamine is too high. So that will actually mean that since your baseline is higher, when you again increase your dopamine from the baseline to go higher, you actually can't derive that much enjoyment, because you can't increasingly increase your dopamine to abnormally high levels. There is also a ceiling on that matter. And in this specific case, if you, for example, play video games which constantly increase your dopamine, because there are several aspects that dopamine likes in the games, but we've already talked about in the previous videos, for example, as novelty factors, stuff where you actually achieve something as a male, which basically are the two largest things that dopamine goes after. So basically novelty and achieving something is that basically the two main aspects of video games. And there you can see that if the baseline then increases, you won't enjoy activities, any other activities than video games or not that much, because the baseline is already high. So even if, for example, you manage to win a race in real life, let's say, or if you manage to get a job, the increase of the dopamine, if the baseline is already too high, won't be as high as it should have been previously, and you won't even derive that much motivation and enjoyment from your work. So this is what you have to remember, guys, is that the previous ways how you handle your dopamine levels matter, and this is especially why you can see that people who consistently play video games, or basically consistently just scroll newsfeed section all the time, doesn't even have to be all the time, but consistently, for example, every day, are less motivated in life, because they, let's say, use their dopamine levels on the activities which do not give them any benefits, such as games or news feeds. On socials, of course, there are many other TV, for example, endless scrolling throughout the channels. That has been, I think, particular fun, especially in the 20th century back then. But all of this encompass the same principle of using the dopamine pathways to make you more likely to come back to them, and then they make you less likely to enjoy the activities that give you the real benefits, such as getting a new job, getting a promotion, wanting to work harder, wanting to go to the gym. So definitely watch out for the historic levels of dopamine on that. Now I want to jump into 3 tools which you can then use based on all aspects of dopamine we've just talked about, because this was basically a sort of theory of how it truly works. And one especially concerns for everything, for workplace, for lifting, gym, studying, and anything else, is caffeine. And caffeine, funnily enough, it doesn't necessarily just increase your dopamine, but increase your dopamine receptivity. In our brain, there are receptors which basically dopamine attaches to them, and usually all of the activities we've discussed up to now increase the release of the dopamine in your brain. But what caffeine does is that it increases the number of receptors in your brain and the receptivity to caffeine, which means that with the dopamine which is already in your system, it's going to act even more potently than ever before. This could have been seen very often with people who drank coffee and smoked cigarettes at the same time. That era has kind of gone by now, and I think probably one of the more modern examples could be eating chocolate with coffee, which chocolate will raise your dopamine, but coffee will make your brain more receptive to the dopamine which is released because of the chocolate. This is a tool which you can use for pretty much anything. Coffee, when it's consumed in any way or shape or form, will increase the dopamine receptivity. And what this will mean is that if you, for example, do your work, your lifts with it, it will make you want to try and do more, and you will be more motivated to perform on the particular lifts just by increasing your dopamine receptivity. That is pretty much quite a bit helpful, because this is one of the usually different ways than we usually think about dopamine, because we usually think about increasing or decreasing it, but coffee acts basically without having to increase or decrease the baseline levels of dopamine, and it will increase your receptivity to dopamine which is already in your system. And the second tool, I've also written this down, is that you would like to focus your dopamine release on particular activities. And this relates to the fact that, as we've discussed, is that these dopamine baseline levels increase or decrease based on your previous history of how you've used your dopamine on particular activities. I will mention one very important thing, is that this history you can usually think of 2 weeks up to 3 months. I know it's very broad range, but up to 3 months is the time scale for which, if you've done many activities which you wouldn't have liked to do, and you will have liked to focus on more activities that will be beneficial to you, well, if you've done them, let's say for example 4 months ago, that will basically mean that those don't have any or all no effect on the dopamine levels which you have now, and all the activities you've done for past week and half or up to 2 weeks will have an effect on the dopamine levels you have now. One good thing that we'll still discuss is how to actually circumvent that, but when coming back to the topic around this tool of how to use the dopamine levels for particular activities, what you now have to figure out is that the dopamine is, let's say, like the reserve in your bank account. You can take away the cash from that, and you will use it for a particular activity which will make you more motivated to do that. What you will need to then remember is that this bank account can dry up with money, and you will then need to actually, let's say, wait until you get it back, let's say, with your income usually, and in this case it will be a synonym to the dopamine levels. It always will come back, but you just need to figure out the activities you want to use it on, because if you use it sparingly on, let's say, games was the one example, and you would like to do more beneficial activities in your life, well, you will need to figure out that you would like to use your attention and your time, for example, on the workplace to be more motivated to do that. because the bank account gets emptied, the dopamine gets emptied, and your motivation and drive to succeed at work would be empty if you will have used your dopamine for other activities, such as I mentioned games, but there are many other examples which we could talk about on that end. How would that basically translate to life, because I think we also need to talk practically, is that the best case scenario will be for example, 2 weeks time frame, if you would like to do this dopamine detox, which is talked about often, but I think that's absolute horseshit. What you would like to do is that you wouldn't even try to play games and the activities that you do, which are many, which you probably wouldn't like to do, and you would particularly just focus on the workplace, and you would have liked to use a third tool, which we'll discuss, to increase your dopamine tonically over time, and to not have these high dopamine highs from video games, as an example. So the tool in here you will need to figure out is that what you focus on matters, and if you focus on, for example, work, which will also increase your dopamine over time, so it isn't just a phasic increase of dopamine, you will be automatically much more motivated if you stop doing the activities which usually give you the greatest, let's say, pleasure, which pleasure is actually many times in the form of dopamine, although dopamine is a molecule of drive and motivation on that end. It just makes us feel good to be associated with pleasure on that end. Then the third tool is what we need to discuss, is that you basically like to stimulate the long-lasting effects of dopamine with activities that will do that. The reason why is because usually the worst shit we usually do is when we feel the worst. I know many people who basically from Monday to Friday they do their work, they do everything, especially young men. They, for example, get to school, they have immense week, they go to the gym, and then weekend comes, they have nothing to do and they jack off to porn, for example, yeah? That happens many times, and it's because you didn't do anything to increase your dopamine levels during the weekend. You had nothing to look forward to, which is pretty much the biggest issue you will have yourself on the weekends. If you have nothing to do, then it's just not going to end well. So we need to figure out activities that you can do every day which will increase your dopamine tonically over time. Now, there are particularly some activities which are very helpful, and we'll again circle back to how the tonic release works, is that when you do these activities, it will not only increase your dopamine at the time you've done the activities, but it will make you increase your dopamine levels over time. But this overtime effect doesn't have a particular effect on the baseline levels of dopamine, so you won't feel shit about your life a couple of hours after you've increased your dopamine. But on the other hand, this dopamine increase will be much more beneficial to your life, and if you do these activities consistently, you can basically feel better every day at any time. What these activities are also the ones which people hate. They are cold showers. Now, cold showers work through two particular pathways, but what I will make this as practically for you is that one, they also increase your cortisol, which is a stress hormone. What this basically will do is that since you have a huge peak in cortisol when you do cold showers, this will mean that whenever your cortisol spikes later in the day, you will feel less stressed because you've already handled a huge spike of cortisol in the morning. This is basically a huge way our brain works. You want to be able to handle your cortisol levels going high, and cold showers, and if you handle cold showers, you will handle the biggest spike of cortisol you can have in your day. And then even if something stressful happens in the workplace, you have basically self-assured that you will handle it because you've already had a similar cortisol peak in the morning, which is basically the molecule of stress. You just have to remember that, and in my opinion, handling cold showers is much easier and is much more risk-free than if you have to handle something at your workplace, or if something blows up in your business, which if you handle badly can have long-lasting consequences. And doing cold showers will enable you to make much better decisions, also feel much better about them, and much more self-assured that you've done the this decision on thing. Now, the second thing I will mention again is also the sunlight exposure. Sunlight exposure is huge because it also acts very similarly as cold showers, both on the dopamine levels and on the cortisol. Now, in terms of sunlight exposure, this doesn't mean that the sun has to literally light up on your skin. You just need to see sun rays coming into your eyes, and how that could be done is that you could just be sitting at your home listening to a podcast, and you could basically watch the sky or basically get some rays into your eyes. One particular thing that you ask, if you stay at home, if you don't want to walk outside, that will be the most beneficial, but you can also do it at home if you need to, is that if you choose the route of doing it at home, what you will need to figure out is that you can't have your windows closed, because about 90% of the sun rays going through the window will just diminish, and the effect of the sun rays to your eyes will be pretty much none. So if you choose the particular route of doing the sunlight exposure, especially in the morning, please do it with your windows opened. That will enable you to have all the sun rays coming into your eyes that you would actually need. The third thing, which still needs to be mentioned, and I would just mention that if you handle the first two, this third one doesn't need to be done, but it's still beneficial, is social connections. And those will also increase your dopamine, and also a molecule which is called, I believe, Ketamine. It basically, what it does is that if it goes too high, you will feel socially excluded. It will make you more aggressive. This molecule usually gets spiked up if you are in, for example, studies of mice which were excluded from their social group and were by themselves. Now, usually I don't think we have cases where that happens, but we see it actually increasingly happening throughout the world, where people are basically socially excluded just by their own choice, or they had to. So having and maintaining social connections is very important, both because of this molecule ketamine, and also because of the fact that it will increase your dopamine if you are able to engage in meaningful connections and basic conversations with people. And I will again mention that it's necessary to have those conversations face to face, because that will basically have these long-lasting effects of dopamine and also on the ketamine levels. So this was a much larger deep dive into dopamine and basic tools on how you can leverage those. All tools which we've discussed today will work on gym and also work, because you will be able to, one, better maintain your dopamine levels, which will make you more motivated to perform activities in the gym and on the workplace if you decide to do so. If you wouldn't like to do that, you can instead use all of these tools, for example, for games, if you would like to. On the other hand, now you also have an understanding of the baseline levels of dopamine and how those increase or decrease based on the previous days or ways you've handled your dopamine levels. And you also know about these chronic and phasic increases of dopamine. One thing I will still mention as, let's say, a bonus tool is that if you would have liked to increase your particular chance of wanting and sticking to the gym consistently, or also making sure that you are continuously motivated for your work, one of the ways you can do that is through music. And if you do all of these tools we've done before and you still find yourself sometimes lacking in your motivation to do gym or to work on yourself or on your business, music will have long-lasting effects of dopamine increase. It's again not going to be a phasic increase, but you will have to also decide by yourself whether the music, how it makes you feel, because every music is different. And I will basically tell you about two types of music which I found myself. One is the type which will make you feel good immediately. I will compare this type of music to the motivation videos which you can see. If the music does that, if the particular music or video clip does that for you, where it basically makes you feel immediately good, but then after a couple of hours you feel worse, I would be wary about using that music, because what it means is that you basically see and feel the phasic increase of dopamine in your brain, which means that since it goes so high because of this particular type of music, you will then feel worse after. There aren't any particular genres that basically will increase your dopamine over time or will increase your dopamine physically as this. You will just have to gauge it for yourself which music makes you more likely to want to work and won't make you feel shit. Once you handle that, you can use this either for gym. So when you are working out, you can turn up the music. This is also one of the particular reasons why gyms very often have music in them, although they didn't do it for exactly this reason, but it was observed that people were more likely to come back to the gym when there was actually music playing, and it also made them more relaxed at the same time. So this is one of the major, or if not the biggest reasons why music is also in there, as people requested it and it made them perform better in the gym as well. This is for the particular reason is that it does increase your dopamine levels, and the beautiful thing about music is that you can do any activity you would like and you can listen to music with it, and during it, it's not a thing that you need to do without, for example, cleaning up your house, doing gym, working. You can listen to music and do all these activities I've just described at the same time. So that comes to the end of the video. I hope you've learned a lot. I would just mention that if you would like to support us, you can visit our website, it's in the description, but I will also mention Spadia.shop, where I have a product which will help you to enhance your work and gym capabilities. You can look into that, or we also now have a new release of the Fitness Advantage ebook, which you can check out on our website, again, Spadia.shop. Thank you.